The wind found every crack in that cabin, clawing through chinks in the logs like it had a score to settle with me personally. Emma whimpered in her sleep, curled against my chest like a starving kitten. She was 6 months old, all bone and breath, her body warmer than the dying fire and her need louder than my shame. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. She'd had nothing but weak milk and melted snow. I stared at the last thing I hadn't pawned, bartered, or burned, my mother's quilt, stitched with prairie stars and hand-dyed blues that had been passed down through 2 generations of women tougher than I'd ever claimed to be. When my husband died under a red sky outside Fort Bridger, that quilt had wrapped him one last time before the ground did. When Emma was born, I'd laid her on it, whispering stories about the McKenna women, about strength and pride and grit. And now I was gonna trade it for bread. It felt like tearing my own skin off. I wrapped Emma tight in my coat and walked the 2 miles into town, with the wind howling like it had lost something precious. The street was mostly empty, the bakery's chimney coughing weak smoke into the gray sky. Inside, the scent of yeast and warmth and life nearly dropped me to my knees. "Miss McKenna," said old man Greaves from behind the counter. His eyes lingered too long on the blanket in my arms. "I don't reckon I can give you more than—" "I know. Just half a loaf, please." His sigh felt heavier than the hatchet my husband once carried. "This ain't worth what you think. It's all I've got." He gave me the bread and wouldn't meet my eyes. I handed over the quilt with a hand that trembled for reasons beyond cold. It felt like a betrayal of my mother, of the woman I used to be. Outside, the cold bit harder. I took the bread under my arm and pulled Emma tighter. I told myself it was fine, that I'd chosen this, that pride don't feed babies. Still, the glances from the townsfolk stung worse than the wind. Widow McKenna trading heirlooms for crust. I saw it in their looks. Pity laced with distance, as if I might steal something else next, as if desperation were catching. I walked past the church where Pastor Eldridge's wife narrowed her eyes like she smelled sin on me, past the mercantile where a boy I used to teach turned his face away. I hadn't even asked for help, but somehow they looked at me like I had. Emma made a soft noise, and I kissed her brow, lips cracking from cold. "It's all right," I whispered. "You've got bread now. Mama will make it work." But inside, I felt hollowed out. Not just by hunger, by the ache of giving up something sacred and still coming away empty-handed. No firewood, no milk, just half a loaf of bread and a baby who didn't know her mother had just gambled with ghosts. Snow has started falling again by the time I crossed back past the churchyard. Tiny, bitter flakes that melted on Emma's cheeks before she could blink. I held her close, the crust of bread tucked deep in my coat. The half-loaf already felt lighter, like it knew it didn't belong in a mother's arms, but in a coffin marked for pride. I kept my head down, eyes on the muddy slush that pooled in the wagon ruts. The wind whistled, and from behind me came the sound of hooves. Not a wagon, a single horse, slow and deliberate. I stepped aside before the rider could ask, tucking Emma's face away from the wet. "Mrs. McKenna." I turned at the voice, smooth as creekstone and just as cold. Jacob Thornfield sat atop a black gelding,
tall in the saddle, his long wool coat dusted in snow. I hadn't spoken to him since my husband's funeral. He'd been there that day, silent, standing alone under a wide-brimmed Stetson that looked too fine for a place like Millstone. Now that same hat was in his hand. "Emma looks cold," he said. I bristled. "She's warm enough." He didn't argue, just nodded. And without another word, he leaned forward and placed the Stetson, that beautiful, weathered, deep brown hat, onto Emma's head. It swallowed her little face, but she blinked up at him like he had given her the moon. My breath hitched. He tipped his head to me, reined the gelding, and rode on. No explanation, no offer, no charity-laced speech, just a gesture so strange, so intimate, it stunned me. I stood there, in the middle of the street, while people stared. The tailor's wife across the way paused mid-sweep. The barkeep leaned against his saloon door, his arms crossed. They saw a rancher place his finest hat on a widow's child, like christening a claim. And they saw me let him do it. I should have taken it off, run after him, shoved it back in his hands and spat at the ground for good measure. Instead, I walked the rest of the way home with Emma wearing that damn hat. That night, when she was asleep, I sat staring at the thing by firelight. It was well worn but cared for, the leather band dark from years of sweat and storms. I'd seen men shot for less valuable things. It didn't make sense. A man's hat like that was personal, a man's signature. You didn't give it away, not unless it meant something, not unless you meant something. The fire popped. Emma stirred in her sleep, lip twitching like she was dreaming of better days. I waited until her breathing evened out, then I put on my boots, wrapped the bread tied in cloth, and walked the mile through snow and dusk to Jacob Thornfield's ranch. The house stood quiet on the hill, a single lamp burning in the window. I hesitated at the porch steps, the hat in my hands now, not on my daughter's head. I knocked. A long pause. Then the door opened. He stood there, no coat, shirt sleeves rolled up, and still smelling of saddle oil and smoke. "You forgot something," I said, holding out the hat. He looked at it, then at me. "No," he said simply. "I didn't."
By morning, the whole damn town was buzzing. I didn't need ears inside the saloon or the church to know it. Millstone wasn't big, but its mouths were sharp and fast, and gossip traveled quicker than any telegraph ever could. Emma and I hadn't been 10 paces past the post office before Mrs. Caldwell stopped me in the street. She wore her mourning shawl like armor, even though her husband had died 5 years back and she hadn't liked him much. Her eyes raked across Emma, and the Stetson still snug on her tiny head like it was filth. "Sarah," she said, voice dipped in sugar and spite, "we were just praying for you this morning at Women's Fellowship." "Appreciate it," I said, adjusting Emma's blanket. She stepped closer. "But it'd be a shame if all that prayer was wasted because someone couldn't keep her dignity intact." Behind her, 3 other church matrons stood in a tight little flock, their arms crossed like a firing squad of judgment. I knew 'em all, had scrubbed pews beside them, sat through sermons about forgiveness and righteousness. Now their eyes bore down on me like I'd been caught whoring behind the barn. "I'm not sure I follow," I said, voice steady. Mrs. Caldwell pursed her lips, the kind of expression women make before they flay you alive with kindness. "The hat, dear, the visits, Jacob Thornfield's interest. It's raising questions.
inappropriate ones, especially considering how quickly your husband's grave's gone cold. I felt my fingers tighten around Emma. My heart thudded, not in shame, not yet, but in anger. She wasn't even pretending. She wanted me small, quiet, grateful. I didn't ask for the hat. No, but you kept it, Mrs. Simmons chimed in, voice sharp as a sewing needle. And you went to his house. I returned it. Did you? Mrs. Caldwell smiled like a knife. Funny, word is he told folks it belongs to your daughter now, that it looks better on her than it ever did on him. The laughter from her little flock was quick and brittle. I should have shouted, should have torn the damn thing off her head and thrown it at their feet. Instead, I just held her closer. She was cold, I said. He helped. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Help can turn to a dependence, and dependence leads to compromise. A woman without a husband should be especially careful. That did it. I straightened up and met her stare. Is that what you call it? Compromise? When a man shows kindness without asking for anything back? She blinked, just once. I'll think about what you said, I added, flat and final. And I walked on. Behind me, their whispers rose like smoke, but I didn't stop. I didn't tear the hat away from Emma's head. I didn't run to the church and beg forgiveness for something I hadn't done. I walked past the saloon, past the barber, past the man who once offered me a ride to the cemetery after my husband's death. Now he wouldn't even nod at me. Emma burbled and reached for the brim of her hat, tapping it with tiny fingers. I smiled in spite of myself. That night, I watched the fire burn low while Millstone judged me from their dinner tables and prayer circles. Let them talk. I'll think about it, I'd said. And I would, but not in the way they hoped.
By the time the next week rolled around, I had 2 silver coins left in my tin under the floorboard. 2. One from the Army pension, delayed, partial, an insult, really, and one I'd earned mending a coat for Mr. Holloway's youngest boy. It wasn't enough for much, certainly not enough to change the town's opinion of me, but it was something, and it was mine. I rose before the sun, careful not to wake Emma. Her tiny breaths puffed into the cold cabin air like whispers from heaven. I dressed quick, tugging on my boots and coat, and pressed those 2 coins into my gloved hand like they were my last defense against oblivion. No borrowed goods, no favors, no hats. Just me, my name, and a plan to buy back what little dignity I could. The first stop was the tailor. I owed her $2 for patching a tear in Emma's baptism dress 3 months ago, something I'd promised to repay after harvest, before the blight, before everything fell apart. I handed her the first coin, and her eyes widened like I'd slapped her. "What's this?" she asked, voice suspicious. "Payment." She hesitated. "Did Thornfield?" "No," I cut in. "It's mine. Take it." I didn't wait for a thank you. I turned and headed for Greaves' Bakery. The line was short. A young couple stood behind me, whispering too loud. I heard my name, heard widow like it was a dirty word. When it was my turn, Greaves stared down at me with that same tired pity as before. I set the second coin on the counter. "Whole loaf," I said. He blinked. "You sure?" "Yes. And I'll take it warm if you've got one." He wrapped it in brown paper, hands slower than usual. "Folks been talking, Sarah." I figured. He handed over the bread and cleared his throat. They say you're caught up with Jacob Thornfield? I paused, met his eyes. They're wrong. He stared at me a beat longer, then nodded. Then they'll move on soon enough. I turned, holding that warm bread like a small victory. The final stop was the general store. I didn't owe money there, but I needed to be seen. I needed them to know that I was still walking, still choosing, still mine. Mrs. Caldwell was inside. Of course she was, folding linens like she ran the place. I walked right past her, chin high, Emma in my arms and the Thornfield hat still perched on her head. Let 'em talk. Let 'em stew. I didn't owe shame to anyone. I bought a jar of molasses. Frivolous, yes, but I wanted something sweet that day. And left the store with my daughter cooing into the cold. The whispers started again as I passed the saloon, louder this time. A man chuckled. Someone muttered something about earning favors in the saddle. I didn't flinch, because I had paid my debts, because my child had food, because I wasn't hiding. That night, I lit the fire early. I held Emma close and fed her a soft bit of the crust. She laughed, crumbs sticking to her lip, the hat sliding down over one eye. I smiled and let her keep it there. Outside, the wind howled again, but this time it didn't reach me. I had nothing left but my spine, and it was enough.
3 days passed before I saw Jacob Thornfield again. I was walking the ridge trail just past the Mill Creek. Emma strapped to my chest and a basket swinging from my arm with bread, cloth diapers, and a tin of leftover stew. The sun had finally thawed the edges of winter, dripping cold water off the eaves of the hills and soaking the ground into a muddy mess. Spring always looked like a graveyard at first. Rot, bones, and old things surfacing. I didn't hear him approach, just the slow creak of leather and the quiet clop of hooves behind me. I turned, and there he was, sitting tall on that black gelding like he'd ridden straight out of a dime novel. But Jacob never looked like fiction. His face was all real things. Dust, scars, quiet storms. He dismounted without a word. "I didn't think I'd see you out here," I said. "I was riding fence," he replied. Then he looked at Emma and smiled faintly. "Glad to see she still likes the hat." I didn't smile back. Not yet. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," I said. "I know. She's too young to understand it, but I'm not. Folks think I've gone soft on you." He studied me for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. A deed. He held it out to me. "What's this?" "It's yours." "My land?" He nodded. "I bought it from the bank last week. They were gonna foreclose after winter." I stared at the paper. Felt like he'd dropped a rock in my hands. Something that could either build a foundation or crush a rib. "You bought it?" I repeated. "For you. No one gives land away, Jacob." "I do." My heart kicked up like a startled colt. "Why?" "Because it should stay yours. Because you've got a daughter who needs a roof. Because I've got too much land and too little reason to keep it to myself." He said it plain. No smile, no tilt of the head. Just that calm voice that always sounded like it had already weathered the worst of life and wasn't much afraid of the rest. But I wasn't calm. I was angry. I said,
You went behind my back. You did what the town accuses me of, letting a man fix my problems for a price. There's no price. There's always a price. Emma stirred, sensing my tension. I bounced her gently, eyes never leaving Jacob's. You think I'm some cause for charity? A stray dog you tossed a bone to? He stiffened. No. You think a woman can't find her own footing without a man stepping in with papers and good intentions? I think you're tired. And I think you don't want your daughter growing up cold and hungry just to prove a point. The words hit harder than he meant them to. I stepped back. You don't get to decide what I need. I'm not deciding. I'm offering. That deed is a chain if I take it. It's a key if you want it to be. We stared each other down, two stubborn souls refusing to blink first. I didn't take the paper. Not then. I turned. Emma snuggled against my chest, and I walked away with the wind pulling at my skirts and my pride aching like a broken tooth. Behind me, I heard the rustle of parchment slipping back into his coat. I didn't know if I hated him or loved him in that moment, but I knew I'd never be the same after it.
I didn't sleep that night. The deed sat in my mind like a live coal, burning holes through every corner of thought. I paced the cabin till the fire went cold. I fed Emma, I wrapped her in quilts. I tried to hum the lullabies my mother used to sing, but nothing settled. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jacob's hand holding out that folded paper. The way his eyes didn't flinch even when mine brimmed with fury. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. Emma and I walked to Thornfield's ranch just after dawn. The air was crisp, sky painted in the softest blue I'd seen in weeks, and the land spread wide and awakened around us. His ranch house stood steady on the hill like it always had. Too big for one man, too empty for a place with so much warmth in its bones. He was splitting wood out back. Didn't stop when he saw me. Just drove the axe clean through a log and looked up. I didn't come for another argument, I said. Good, he replied, tossing the split to the stack. I took a breath. I came because I need to understand why. He wiped his hands on a rag, walked over, slow and even. I met him halfway. You bought my land. You gave Emma your hat. You watch us like we're yours to protect, I said. But you've never asked for a thing, not even a kind word. I don't protect things I own. I protect what I care about. I blinked hard at that. That's not how most men around here work. I ain't most men. I gave a half laugh, bitter and quiet. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you carried that child through winter storms on foot. I know you turned down every offer that came with strings. I know you'd rather burn than bend. And I know I've never once pitied you, only admired you. His voice cracked a little, and I hated that it made something inside me soften. I looked away. You think I'm brave, but truth is I don't even remember what hope feels like. It's been gone so long I've learned to survive without it. Jacob stepped closer. Then let me remind you. He took the deed from his coat again, held it out but didn't force it. In his other hand, he held something else.
A small carved wooden bird. Rough, simple, beautiful in its own way. I found it in your husband's cabin. Thought it might be Emma's. I fixed the wing. I stared down at it. It was Thomas's. He'd carved it the week before he left for that last drive. Said it was the first of many toys he'd make for Emma. It had broken when I dropped it in grief. Now it was whole again. I couldn't speak. You don't owe me anything, Jacob said softly. This deed, it's not a transaction. It's me saying I believe in you, that you deserve more than this fight for scraps. I don't know if I believe in you, I whispered. That's all right. I'll believe enough for both of us, for now. My throat tightened. My heart did something I hadn't felt in years. It fluttered. I reached for the wooden bird first. Then, slowly, the deed. He didn't smile. He just looked relieved, like he'd been holding his breath too. I'm still angry, I said. You're allowed. And scared. So am I. Emma gurgled between us, reaching for his sleeve with one tiny hand. He let her grab on. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe, not just in kindness, but in the kind that didn't ask to be repaid, in the kind that stayed. It didn't take long for the church to come calling. Word spread faster than prairie fire. Sarah McKenna accepted the deed, took the land, and hadn't returned the Thornfield hat. Worse still, she'd been seen with Jacob by the river, Emma in his arms like she belonged there. By week's end, Pastor Elridge requested a private word. I knew better. There's no such thing as privacy when the whole town's holding its breath, waiting to see if the widow will fold or stand her ground. I showed up to the church hall alone, Sarah with Jacob for the afternoon. That fact alone made the ladies' faces tighten like freshly sewn seams. Mrs. Caldwell was there, so was Mrs. Simmons, 3 other church elders too, 2 men, 1 widow who'd taken her late husband's place on the board and wore righteousness like armor. They offered me tea. I didn't drink it. Pastor Elridge cleared his throat and folded his hands like a man preparing to dig a grave with words. Sarah, there's concern that your recent choices may be compromising your place in the community. I looked him dead in the eye. You mean the land? He blinked. We mean the appearance of impropriety. Mrs. Caldwell jumped in. It reflects poorly when a woman accepts property from a man who is not her kin or husband. And what would reflect better? Letting my daughter freeze to death out of pride? Mrs. Simmons sniffed. There are charitable options. I don't need charity. I need peace. Elridge leaned forward. The town's willing to help. We can arrange a stipend. Maybe place Emma with a schooling family once she's older, but only if I give up Jacob. He didn't deny it. The town's watching, Mrs. Caldwell said. They look to the church for moral clarity. I smiled, cold. Then you'd better look harder. A silence fell, sharp and tight. You'd risk your standing? Simmons asked. I don't stand for your approval, I said, voice low. I stand for Emma and for myself. The words didn't shake. For once, neither did I. They tried to sweeten the threat, said I'd be turned away from the pantry, the Widow's Relief Fund, that I wouldn't be welcome to teach at the school come spring, that good folk would cross the street to avoid the stench of scandal. I've lived through worse, I told him, and if you think I'll teach my daughter that a woman's place is beneath your thumb, you don't know me at all. I stood. Mrs. Caldwell's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Before I walked out, I turned one last time. If the church wants to excommunicate a woman for accepting help without shame, then maybe the sin isn't mine. I stepped into the daylight with my spine straight and my hands steady. When I got home, Emma squealed from Jacob's arms. Her little hands reached for me, and that too-big hat bobbed down over her eyes as she laughed. I kissed her forehead and pulled her close. The town could talk, but my voice had finally risen loud enough to answer back.
3 years later, the hat still didn't fit her. Emma sat on the porch rail of the Thornfield Ranch, legs swinging, her little boots caked in dry mud from chasing chickens through the yard. The Stetson sat low on her brow, tipped back just enough to show her freckles and that wild, gap-toothed grin. "Don't fall," I warned, wiping flour off my hands as I stepped outside with the birthday cake, lopsided and half-burnt and covered in so much chocolate Emma had gasped like I'd brought home a miracle. "She's fine," Jacob called from under the big cottonwood tree, sharpening a fence tool. "Just trying to act taller than she is." "She gets that from you," I muttered, though I couldn't help but smile. It had been a quiet birthday, just the three of us. A far cry from the days when I dreaded footsteps on my porch and whispers behind the church doors. The town had softened, not because they changed, but because I did. I didn't flinch anymore. When we walked into town now, no one turned away. A few nodded, some even smiled. Mrs. Caldwell once offered Emma a lemon drop outside the Mercantile. I almost laughed in her face. But I didn't. I'd won. Quietly. Completely. I cut the cake while Emma clapped and bounced in her seat. Her joy was unshakable. A little girl raised on courage, not caution. She'd never know the cold hunger I once held her against. She'd never feel shame just for surviving. She reached for the biggest slice, and the hat slipped sideways, covering her eyes. She giggled and shoved it back into place with both hands. Still wearing it. After all this time. "I offered to get her a new one," Jacob said, leaning on the porch rail beside me. "She said no. She always says no. She said this one's magic." I looked at him. Maybe it is. We stood there a while, watching her devour the cake, her fingers sticky and her cheeks covered in crumbs and sunshine. Hard to believe, isn't it? What started it all? He didn't need to ask what I meant. That hat, that moment, that line in the snow between shame and mercy. I remembered the woman I'd been then, brittle and hollow, afraid of hunger, afraid of kindness, afraid of herself. And now I was Sarah Thornfield, wife, mother, landowner, no one's burden, no one's kept thing, just a woman who'd chosen to stay standing even when the wind howled. I looked at Jacob. "I'm happy," I said simply. He smiled, that quiet, crooked smile that still unraveled me. "You earned it." Emma held out her chocolate-smeared hands, demanding another slice. I laughed and gave her one, sticky fingers and all. The wind blew soft across the hills. No storm in it, just warmth and prairie dust. And for once, I didn't brace myself.
I leaned in.